Happy Father's Day. It's weird being a dad on Father's Day. I kind of got one of those days, right, like that last year I didn't have Father's Day. I was like an expectant father, but this year I'm actually a dad, and so it's exciting to like be able to celebrate Father's Day. But Father's Day, for the most part, reminds me of youth ministry. Because I did youth ministry for 10 years, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of like stupid games, duct taping kids to walls and like eating like spoonfuls of cinnamon and seeing who could swallow it. Like we did some pretty goofy things. It was a really enjoyable time, but we got to like help students, middle school and high school, live out faith in a really practical way. And they got excited about it and they got joy from it. And it was a great thing. But over the couple churches that I served and over the 10 years of serving in youth ministry, there was always one hiccup with students and their faith. And it was this. It was if they experienced one thing in youth ministry and a different thing at home, it kind of messed with their faith, not helped build up their faith. And what we saw time and time again was there were a lot of students who would come and they would go, I'm really passionate about this and I'm really excited about this. And middle school would be great and they would be like on fire for God. And then they would kind of get to like freshman year and sophomore year and they would still be engaged. And then all of a sudden they would get that driver's license. And what I noticed more times than not was not just that they checked out of church because they had better offers or better options. It was that they checked out because that's what they saw dad do. And see, mom would come to church and mom would be engaged and mom would go on like the youth group trip every now and then. But a lot of times, dad would sit in church but never really engage with it. And he would be like around the conversation and maybe even part of the conversation, but definitely was kind of like a step back from the conversation. He never really seemed to engage. And that isn't always true, but here's what I know. The most effective way that you can be a great dad is to engage with faith. I've seen it time and time again. When a dad steps back, what we see is the kids step back. And it starts with the boys because they look up to dad. Dad models what it is to have faith to them. Dad models what it is to be a man. Dad models what it is of how to deal with anger, how to deal with frustration, or how to deal with stress, or how to deal with life. But then the girls look up to that too. And so what we would see time and time again is that kids would be passionate about their faith and feel like they were able to live it out, and then they would go home and see a different style of faith and go, maybe this just isn't for me, or maybe it's cooked up to be more than what I thought it would be. And they begin to like have all these issues and all these problems, and they begin to check out. And so really, this morning's message is not so much a Father's Day message in that like we're going to talk about what it means to be a dad, and we have a nice little acrostic or an acronym or something like we can hold to. I've done those. You can go back and listen to some of our other messages on Father's Day, and they were great messages. I'm not like ashamed of those. But at the same time, like that's not this morning. We're not going to talk about what it means to be a dad. This is my goal, really, in this whole series. The series that we're doing is called Ephesians. It's Paul's guide to practical faith. Here's what my hope is. My hope is that you would get a guide to practical faith so that you can live it out on a regular basis. That's my whole hope for this series. We're kicking it off this week. We're going to do it for the next 5 weeks. I think Father's Day is the perfect time to do it because dads want something that's practical. I don't know about you guys, but like I learn a lot from YouTube videos. Probably should have listened in school. Probably should have listened like when my dad was trying to teach me some things, didn't so much listen in those moments. But now that I find myself like as a homeowner and like something breaks, I have to fix it. And I don't want to pay somebody the enormous rate of labor that exists in our country. And not that they're getting overpaid, just that I don't want to pay it is really what it comes down to. And so I just go on YouTube and I go, how to fix this plumbing problem? How to fix this other problem? Whatever the issue is, how do I fix this issue? And then I go on YouTube and YouTube tells me how to do it. But here's what I don't do. I don't go on YouTube and search for things that have nothing to do with what I'm going through in life. Like I don't spend a lot of time on YouTube right now trying to figure out how to fix an HVAC system because my HVAC system's working well. Dear God, help it not to break now. Right? Like I'm not trying to jinx myself there. If I do, Kim's going to kill me, and I won't be here next week. But in reality, I don't go just research things so that if one day they might break at some point, then maybe I'll have a better idea of how to do it. That's just not how I work. I want something that's practical, something I can use today. I want to know like how to do the thing I need to do right now. And Paul, in many ways, writes this letter for the people to be able to experience practical faith. See, Paul had written a lot of letters. Like we read them all throughout the New Testament. He writes about 25% of the New Testament. And so like his letter to the Galatian church or the letter to Galatia is a letter that he writes to address an issue. He started this church, he's moved on from it, he's sitting in a prison cell, but he's hearing stories of what's going on in the Galatian church, and he says, let me address a few issues. Let me write to you to encourage you and to strengthen you and to remind you of what you already know so that you can live out this faith in more of a real way. But he's addressing some problems. When he writes to the church at Corinth, it's a big church that's in like an epicenter of like society, and they're flourishing and they're doing great things, but they also have some very, very real struggles. And so he writes to them and says, let me address some of the tensions that I see that you're dealing with. Ephesians is different. It's not really written to address a tension. It's written, and we'll see in chapter 1 that like he just celebrates what's going on with the people. Like he's proud of this church. He spent about 2.5 years there. If you want to read about like Paul's time in Ephesus, in the city of Ephesus, you can look at Acts 18, 19, probably the end of 17. You're going to see one of Paul's missionary journeys. He spends about 2.5 years in this city. And the reason is because it was an epicenter of worship. Like they worshiped all kinds of Greek and Roman gods. Like there was all kinds of stuff going on. And Paul begins to preach there and make a difference there, and he sees it begin to flourish. And then later in life, Paul writes this letter back to the church at Ephesus. And it's not so much to address a problem as it is just, I think it's like Paul's dissertation on life and the gospel. See, in the book of Ephesians, Paul summarizes the gospel and then talks about how it should affect our whole life story. So he summarizes the gospel story and then says, here's how it should affect your life story, and begin to reshape your life story. It's just an idea of here's what we believe over here. Let me make sure that you clearly understand this. There's a lot of things we can argue about, like how we administer communion is not what he writes about. What he's talking about is like the basics of the gospel. And then he says, based on that, I want to encourage you, I want to challenge you, I want to exhort you to live life differently because of that. And at the end of chapter 1, and we'll get to this prayer in a minute, but at the end of chapter 1, he has a prayer, and his prayer is the same as my prayer for you for this series. His prayer for Ephesians is the same as my prayer for you. It's this: it's that you would experience the power of the gospel in your own life. Not just that you would conceptualize it, not just that it would be up here and you go, that sounds nice, or maybe that doesn't sound that nice, but it wouldn't just be head knowledge, that it would be something that begins to transform every part of who you are. That you would experience the power of the gospel in your life daily. That's my hope. My hope in doing this series is to help you experience that a little bit more. But we have a little bit of a problem. See, a lot of psychologists, I was doing some research this week and I was having some conversations with some different people. Many psychologists say that we suffer from, I don't know what the actual like syndrome would be called, but I have my own term for it. It's the grass is always greener syndrome. And here's what it is. Like, we all get this. Like, some of you are already nodding at me. Yeah, like, I suffer from that. It's this idea. It's the idea that anticipation in many times is more better. Whew. Still learning English. That's pitiful. Anticipation is greater than the actual experience. Anticipation of an experience can be greater than the actual experience. Think about prom. Ladies, come on, think about prom. Like, you went out and you went shopping and you were so excited and you couldn't wait for him to ask you, and then he asked you, and then like you got to go to prom, and then you get all dressed up and you get your makeup done and like your hair's done and all this stuff, and you're so excited for how amazing of a night's going to be, and then you realize it's no different than any other high school dance. It's just sweaty people grinding on one another. And you're like, this didn't really live up to what I thought it would. Maybe it's shopping. Right? Like, I love to shop. I know it's not like the right thing for a guy, right? But I love to shop. I love to go out. I love to buy new stuff. And like, shopping is great. And I go, oh, some new jeans are going to be a great thing. And I go out and then I see like the price tag on the new jeans and I think it'll still be worth it. And then I come home and I deal with what many of us deal with, which is called buyer's remorse. I thought it would be better than it actually is now that I have it. It's the idea that anticipation was greater than the actual experience. Guys, you'll get this one: buying a house. I'm not saying that being a homeowner is a bad thing. I'm just saying that when I thought of buying a house and I was saving money for it, I was really excited. When I had to sign 4 million documents, let me be very clear for anybody in here who does not own a house, 4 million documents. When you have to sign 4 million documents, it's not as exciting. And guys, think about this one. It was great when you lived in an apartment. Now, you didn't think it was great when you lived in an apartment. And you didn't have to deal with any of the maintenance. But it was great when you lived in an apartment and didn't have to deal with any of the maintenance. Because a month into owning a house, you think, this is awesome. I'm investing. Every time I pay, it's not just going to somebody else's pocket. It's like paying towards my mortgage. And like one day I'm going to own this and it's going to be amazing. And I'm so excited and it's wonderful. And then something breaks. And you pick up your phone and you go, I'm going to call myself. Because the maintenance man isn't here anymore. And this is no longer fun. And so now you find yourself back on YouTube going, how do I fix this? Because you called somebody who could do the maintenance and they told you it was $130 an hour. And you said, I hate this. The anticipation was greater than the experience. Maybe it's just something simple, like going fishing. Like, I love to fish. You guys know this about me. I love to be out on the boat and fishing, and I look forward to going fishing. I look forward to catching fish. I look forward to, like, limiting out on rockfish, coming home and having, like, fish tacos. But sometimes when you go out, you throw a cast net, don't catch anything, have somebody else give you free bait because you didn't bring anything else because you were counting on your one way of doing it, and you go home with a broken rod and nothing. Hashtag that's my yesterday. All right, the anticipation outlived the experience. And for a lot of us, that's true, and we can relate, and we get it, and we understand that sometimes anticipation outlives the experience. But what Paul's praying, what our hope is that the experience would actually outlive what we anticipate. And I think it's true at some points in life. I know it's true for at least one person. There's one guy who I think had anticipated something and hoped for something and wished for something for so long, at least all of his adult life, but I even think into part of his childhood. That he had hoped one day he could just grasp this thing and hold it above his head and celebrate it like crazy, and he just had dreamed about it for so long. And then the actual moment happened where the Caps won the Stanley Cup and Ovechkin got to hoist the trophy, and I think in this moment it's actually been better than what he anticipated. Look at this picture. You might not be able to read that. Find a better love story. I'll wait. Somebody posted this meme, and it's just made me laugh. Every time I see it, it makes me laugh. This dude has not put down that Stanley Cup. There was actually interviews with other Capitals players this week that have said he actually is sharing the cup. We know that, like, all the pictures are of him and that, like, he's running through fountains and he's on Jimmy Fallon, and, like, there's a picture of him at a Nats game last week where he's holding up the cup mid-play. Nobody's watching. He's not on the big screen. All he's doing is just celebrating by himself. And there's like a picture, and you can look it up. It's like a picture from like across the field. It's like he's not on the screen because the ball's in play, but he's like standing there celebrating. Like, I think for him, and maybe it's possible for us, but I definitely think for him, the experience has outlived the anticipation. Now, for his liver, maybe not so much. If you haven't seen, this dude has been on like a crazy bender for like the past week and a half. Now, my one problem with this photo is not the amount of alcohol he's drank out of the cup or the fact that like he's laying in bed with the cup. That's whatever. My problem with this photo is that he stole the photo idea from me. Now, my team, the Gardens Ice House of Laurel Bronze 3 Bullets, all right, have won the championship the past 2 seasons. This is amazing. This is I know, a shock. Like, you guys had no idea I was this talented at hockey, but maybe you should come out. We play next Sunday at 7:30. Anyway, Gardens Ice House Laurel. If you need the address, text Kim. In any case, we won the championship the past 2 seasons. We're back-to-back champs. Now, we don't get a Stanley Cup. It's kind of lame. We don't get a Stanley Cup. We just get a T-shirt. But see, I put this photo up last year when we won our second championship in a row. This is my first championship shirt. This is my second one. And Kim took this photo of me, similar to Ovechkin's girl, taking his photo of him. And I posted this on Instagram and on Facebook, and apparently he saw it and has taken the idea and is celebrating. And that's okay. Like, nothing against Ovi. Like, I want him to celebrate, but just give credit where credit's due, right? That was my picture first. Just kidding. I took that this morning because I thought it would be funny, but yeah, we have won the championship 2 seasons in a row, and it's a lot of fun. But here's the thing. honestly, for me and winning that championship, the anticipation really did outlive the experience. It was a lot more fun in the moment, in the game, going to overtime and then to a shootout than it was like celebrating. I mean, we like got in the locker room and had a beer, and it was fun, but like it wasn't like a life-changing moment like what Alex has actually experienced. But my hope for you is that faith wouldn't just be like that where you get a cool t-shirt because you came as a first-time guest, but it would be something that actually begins to shift how you experience life. And so as we begin to do that, I want to give you a little bit of the history of Ephesus. So Ephesus was the epicenter of worship for a lot of Greek and Roman gods, but they had one god that was above all others in Ephesus, and it was the god Artemis. And so here's a statue of Artemis of Ephesus, and if you're into like Greek or Roman mythology, you may know her as Diana. She was the goddess in many areas. I found this pretty interesting. She was the goddess in many areas of the hunt. And so there's a lot of pictures you'll find of Artemis like all over the place where she's like holding a bow and arrow or she's holding a deer by the antlers, and like that's kind of like her thing she was known for. But for whatever reason in Ephesus, Artemis was known as something different. Artemis of Ephesus, if you look this up, is known as the goddess of fertility. She was the goddess who protected midwives. She was the goddess who brought babies. She's the goddess of fertility. And they had a temple that they built to her. And in that temple, or really that temple to Artemis, the temple of Artemis became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. See, the city of Ephesus started as a port city. It was like a city for trade, but the problem was their port, for whatever reason, became innavigable. So you couldn't get a boat into it. And one of the problems with a port town is when the port shuts down, the town pretty much dies. And so the way that this town survived, the way the city of Ephesus was able to still flourish was not by trying to rebuild the port. The way the city of Ephesus was able to flourish was by focusing on Artemis. And so they built a temple to her, and people would come there from all over the place. And I can get it, right? Like if you struggled with infertility, like this may be your hope. IVF treatments didn't exist then. And so you go and you worship and you do something for the God of fertility because maybe, just maybe, something could work out in your favor. And so people would come from all over the place to worship and to acknowledge Artemis. And Paul, when he spent 2.5 years there, begins to preach, not necessarily against Artemis, but just preach about the one true God. And what we find is that Ephesus, like I think many of us here in Laurel are, is split between the God of their culture and the one true God. And so they don't know what to do, and they're not sure how to act. And there's people who begin to bring problems. And if you read in Acts 19, especially the later half of Acts 19, what you'll see is that a riot actually breaks out about this. And it says that it was the people of the way, which was the early term for followers of Christ, and those who were from Ephesus. And it began with Demetrius, that you can see it in Acts 19. It began with Demetrius, a silversmith, who had a large business manufacturing silver shrines of the Greek goddess Artemis. He kept many craftsmen busy. So for him, this is a livelihood. See, Paul's there to preach about the gospel, and Paul's there to preach about how God is greater and God can overcome, and like the actual hope and peace and all those things we can get. But for him, it wasn't about any of that. For Demetrius, it's just a matter of money. See, he calls his guys together, all of his craftsmen, and along with the others employed in similar trades, and he addressed them as follows: Gentlemen, you know that our wealth comes from this business. But as you have seen and as you have heard, this man Paul has persuaded many people that handmade gods aren't really gods at all. See, Paul's argument was that if God could be made with human hands, it's not God. He's got to be above that. That's weak. Like, if you can design him or her, then it's not really God at all. And he's done this not only here in Ephesus, but throughout the entire province. So like, not only is our problem that like the people in our city don't want to buy our statues, it's that people aren't coming from elsewhere to buy our statues. At one point, we see the mayor involved in this argument because it affects the whole business of the city. And Demetrius keeps going. He says, of course, I'm not just talking about the loss of public respect for our business. I'm also concerned that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will lose its influence, and that Artemis, this magnificent goddess worshipped throughout the province of Asia and all around, will be robbed of her great prestige. Now, I'm not trying to doubt Demetrius, but I doubt that statement. It's like my wallet's affected, my city's affected, my security's affected. Oh, and by the way, that honor for Artemis is affected. And then he keeps going. He says, at this, their anger boiled, and they began shouting, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And what, if you kept reading, you can go look this up in Acts 19. What you see is that like some people from following Christ begin to get in the debate. The argument continues and winds up in the amphitheater, like the largest facility that they have to meet. So like imagine like not the Verizon Center. What is it now? The Capital One Arena. Like we all wind up there, and it's like split. And you have one side that's arguing for how great Artemis is, and the other side arguing for how great God is and how stupid Artemis is. And they're just like yelling at each other. And at one point it says that the chants went on for 2 hours. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. A city is split between the God of its culture and the one true God. And as I was preparing this week, I began to think, what are the gods of my culture? And I don't just mean like the gods of society. I mean like, what are the gods in my life? See, because like our culture has some different gods. Like we love to worship money. Like money is not wrong. Don't ever let a Christian like misquote a verse at you and tell you that like if you have money, it's a problem. That's just not true. The love of money is the root of all evil is what Scripture actually says. But then I think we get hung up on things like success. See, that's a struggle for me because there's times where I can define success or misdefine success, and I can hold success at too high of a value, and it begins to become like the thing that defines me. Maybe your thing that you hold on to, maybe your God this morning is stability. I just need peace. I just need the chaos to end. And if I could get stability, if I could get that kind of freedom, if I could get something that would help this pain to go away and the chaos to cease, I'd take it. Maybe like Artemis and Ephesus and the people who would come there, maybe your God is fertility because you're struggling with infertility. Maybe your God could be your children, and I know that sounds goofy because you want to care for your children, but at the same time, if the only way you identify yourself is as a mom or a dad, it can begin to become a problem because you lose yourself in the midst of becoming who you think they want you to be. I did find it interesting. I looked up what are the ways to worship Artemis. I always think it's interesting how people worship God. So Artemis was a goddess who was believed to be a virgin. And one of the ways that you worshiped her was through the temple prostitutes and having sex with her. So I'm not really sure how sex with somebody honors the virgin goddess, but that's what they did. But I was like, well, that really does make sense, though, because our culture loves to glorify sex. And like, this isn't like me picking on culture. This is just me asking the question, like, what are those things for you? What are the gods of your culture? Or maybe the gods of your household? And doing some research on idols, here's what I found out. An idol is just a replacement for God. See, the Greek word translated as idolatry comes from 2 root words. Now, I haven't taken Greek, so I got to just like read this because I'm really, really not sure. Here's what it says. It says it's 2 root words. One word means it's someone who serves or sacrifices or worships. Okay, that makes sense. We all get that. The second word is this. The object of their service is a ghost or an illusion. So literally, an idolater is someone who worships an illusion. And what I really appreciate was that the writer went on, he said this, he said, our culture has long ago given up worshiping old statues. Like, I doubt any of you have the statue of Artemis in your house that you like are burning incense to. That's not what I mean by idolatry this morning. Our culture has long ago given up worshiping old statues. Instead, we devote our time and our heart and our resources to a myriad of things, hoping that they'll give us peace and certainty and some kind of absolution. But these things are simply an illusion. What are those things? If you don't know, or if you want some questions to help identify those, I got 3 questions for you that I took from the same writer who helped break down that Greek. The first question is this. Have you recently said, if only I could have blank, everything would be okay? If only I could have blank, everything would be okay. If only I could have a new job that paid me a little bit more, everything would be all right. If only I could have a relationship with somebody who actually wanted to be here, everything would be better. If only I could have a new car, everything would be okay. It's one way that we begin to find our identity in something else. The second question is this: have you ever felt in your heart a sense of desperation that you're sure would go away if only you were acknowledged or loved by blank? Have you ever felt in your heart a sense of desperation that you're sure would go away if only you were loved or acknowledged by blank? By him or by her or by them? Maybe it's your spouse. If your spouse was more attentive, you know your insecurity would be gone. Maybe it's kids. Like there's some adults in here who are old enough to have like their kids grown up, or really there's some adults in here that are old enough to have their kids say things like, "I hate you." And it's painful and it's hurtful and you don't want to hear it, and I get it because you work hard and you try and provide for them and all you're trying to do is love them, but they just don't seem to be receiving it. And if they would just acknowledge you, if they would just love you, if they would just express some sort of affection for you, you know that that whole sense of like desperation that's inside of you would just go away. Maybe it's not your kids, maybe it's your parents or your in-laws. I don't know who this person is for you. Maybe it's just someone at all because you don't feel lovable at times. And you're sure that if that could happen, that it would all just go away. If only I could have blank, everything would be okay. Or if I could just be acknowledged or loved by blank, then my sense of desperation would go away. The third question is this: have you ever felt anxiety or fear around the possibility of losing blank? Now, let me just clarify. This is not my keys or my wallet or my cell phone. If it's that, I'm desperate all the time around those things. Lose them all the time. Thank God for Tile, all right? Like, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you lose your stuff all the time, get Tile, right? It's great. It helps you find stuff. You don't lose it. My Tile battery actually expired. I lost my wallet the next day. Like, it is stressful. I do that all the time, and I feel all kinds of anxiety or fear around losing those things. But that's not what I'm talking about. Here's what I mean. Have you ever felt anxiety or fear around the possibility of losing something because if you lost it, you thought you'd lose yourself? See, like, my wallet is replaceable. I mean, really, it's replaceable. I don't keep cash. So, like, all I got to do is just make a bunch of phone calls and get some new cards, and everything will be okay. But there's some things in my life over time where I felt like if I lost that, I don't even know who I'd be anymore. I mean, a couple years ago, that was a really unhealthy way that I looked at ministry. I identified myself more as a pastor than I did as a person. And if I lost ministry, if something were to happen, if this were to fall apart, if things were to go wrong, then like there is no way I'd be able to make it because I don't even know who I would be. Have you ever felt that way about something? That if you lost it, you would lose yourself, or if you lost it, you'd lose your sense of identity? See, I think those are great questions, because they begin to identify some things in us. And it doesn't mean if you answered any of those, or if you, as soon as you wrote down a thing like that all is wrong in the world and you need to come up here and like take a knee and repent. That's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm challenging you this morning to begin to think. What are those things that can begin to creep into a place where they shouldn't be in my life? Because if I'm not careful, I'm going to find myself defending Artemis of Ephesus over the one true God. And maybe your Artemis is your bank account. Maybe your Artemis is your kids. Maybe your Artemis is your relationship. I don't know what your Artemis is, but I just don't want to see us in the position where we're split between the God of our culture and the one true God. And Paul's prayer at the end of Ephesians 1 that we're about to read is simply, God, I pray that they would know. I pray that they would experience. I pray that they would more than conceptualize the power of the gospel. I pray that they would get it. in a very real way. One writer says it this way: Paul's hope and prayer is not just that we would know about, but personally experience the power of the gospel and the truth that raised Jesus from the dead. So if you have a Bible, we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 1 in the last couple minutes. And we're going to look at verse 15 through 21. You could go back and read it, and I'd really challenge you in this series. Paul wrote this as a letter, and so it might be a little bit longer period of time it's going to take you. But sit down and read Ephesians as a letter. Don't pay attention to chapters and verses and all of those things. Just start at the beginning and read till the end. It'll probably take you 10, 15 minutes. Because that's how he wrote it. And they would have read it that way, and they would have studied it kind of line by line like we are. But one great way to follow along with the book of Ephesians is to start by reading it as a letter. And so that's a challenge for you this week. But here's how he starts this prayer. He says, "Ever since I first heard of your strong faith in the Lord Jesus and your love for God's people everywhere, ever since I heard about how great you're doing in your faith and how much you love God's people." Like, those are all praises. I have not stopped thanking God for you. I pray for you constantly. Now, some of us in here are like, I don't get it. He just said everything's going well. They're loving people and they're serving God. Why would he be praying for them? And I get it, because we all use prayer as like a safety net, right? Like, prayer is like when things go wrong, I need prayer. Like, I don't need you to tell me everything's going right. Let me pray for you. Like, most of the time, I'm like, no, pray for me when things are going wrong. Pray for me like when Aunt Wilma breaks her hip and like I have to take care of her. Pray for me like when I'm struggling to find a new job. Pray for me like when we find out about like the big news that somebody's pregnant. Like, pray for health. Like pray in those moments when things seem to be falling apart, because that's how like our culture just does prayer. And I'm not like yelling at you. I do the same thing. I don't ask for prayer when everything's going great. I ask for prayer when everything's going wrong. Not when I feel like I'm in control and things are going well. I ask for it when I feel like I have no control and I'm not sure where it's going. But what Paul is teaching us is that like prayer doesn't have to just be a safety net. And in fact, if you look at any of Paul's letters, rarely does he pray for somebody specifically. Most of the time he's praying in moments where he's just praying that they would experience the power of the gospel in their lives on a bigger level. He's like, Aunt Wilma needs healed and you need a new job, and I get it, but more so than that, you've got to experience the power of the gospel, because that'll transform everything. And so he says, I get it, everything's going well, and I'm excited for you, and I pray for you. So he's like this: hey, you think you need prayer just when you're struggling. I agree. But you also need prayer when everything's going really well, because Satan's going to be coming against you. So let me pray for you now. So he prays for them constantly, and here's what he prays. He asks God, the glorious Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, to give you spiritual wisdom and insight so that you might grow in your knowledge of God. We'll come back to this verse. And I pray that your hearts will be flooded with light so that you can understand the confident hope that he has given to those he called his holy people, who are his rich and glorious inheritance. And I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. Now he is far above any ruler or authority or leader or anything else, not only in this world, but also in the world to come. It all makes sense. Like this verse right here, just based on what we know about Ephesus and Artemis, like this makes sense. Like, I pray that you understand that God is bigger than Artemis. Don't get caught up in the gods of your culture. Like, understand that God is bigger. But if you just watch me read that and you go, well, where's the part where he talks about experiencing something? Because you've been standing on stage talking about experiencing something, but I didn't see anything where Paul talked about experiencing something. Yeah, this is my problem with this passage too. I studied it a lot this week, and I listened to some different people and read some different commentaries on it, and I really struggled, because I'm like, everybody keeps talking about Paul's prayer for us to experience the gospel, but I don't see anywhere where Paul says that, because if we go back to verse 17, it says this: I pray that God gives you spiritual wisdom and insight so that you might grow in your knowledge of God. And I'm like, I thought we were supposed to be moving from a concept to experience. I don't really get it. Well, I had to do a little bit more research. So for the word there for knowledge is actually an interesting word. And again, I'm bringing up Greek, and I don't really like doing this because I don't know too much about Greek, but I just have to trust the people that that have studied the scriptures more than I have, the word there for knowledge is the word epignosis. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, so if you're a Greek scholar, correct me afterward, all right? But here's what epignosis means. It's what you learn becomes more than knowledge. It changes how you actually live. See, you grasp the knowledge, and the knowledge begins to grasp your behavior. Epignosis moves beyond mere head knowledge to what we might call heart knowledge, a knowledge that affects the way we live. See, Paul's prayer is not for knowledge. It's not, I pray that you would read another book. I pray that you would see another statue. I pray that you would hear another story. No, he doesn't say that. He says, I pray that as you begin to understand the gospel, as you begin to hear it, as you begin to get it, that it would be something that would not just be up here, but it would be something that comes into your heart that begins to take over your life, that it affects every area of how you live. You grasp the knowledge, and the knowledge grasps your behavior. It begins to change everything. And that's Paul's prayer. And he writes the rest of the book to help us begin to experience that kind of knowledge that's life-changing. Because if I'm honest, I think most of us live life in a way where we can come and we can sit in church and we can hear about the gospel. And we hear some ways that we could do life a little bit differently or maybe a little bit better, but we don't necessarily go and change anything. We begin to just ask a lot of questions and have a lot of issues, and it leads to a lot of frustration. And at some point down the road, we get frustrated with this whole deal, and we just kind of walk away from faith and go, it's just not worth it. It didn't change anything. Knowing that God was on the throne didn't bring my aunt back or my uncle back. Knowing that God was on the throne didn't help me graduate high school or college or get a job. Knowing that God was on the throne didn't fix my marriage. It still fell apart. And what we're praying for this morning is not just knowledge. It's not just information. It's transformation. That if we would get it to a point, what Paul's praying, he says, I want you to get it to the level that it begins to change and affect the way that you live life differently. And so as we close this morning, I'm just going to pray that prayer for us. That somehow in this series over the next 5 weeks, that God would begin to move and God would begin to act, and that as you would spend some time reading through the book of Ephesians with us and you begin to study it and get it at a different level, that somehow it would change. It would move from just your head into your heart and penetrate every area of life for you. So if you will, let's just pray. God, I pray a really simple prayer this morning. I pray that you would move in the way that you moved in Paul's life. Exactly what Paul talked about, epignosis. God, help us to experience that type of knowledge. That we wouldn't just come and we wouldn't just sit at church and we wouldn't just hear a cool story and sing a good song and have a good time, but that it would begin to shift the way we live. God, help us to experience that power, the power that can transform our lives. It's in your name I pray. Amen.